parashiyot left. Last week we read the Torah portion of Ki Tetzeh, of when the Jewish people go out to war, to conquer the land of Israel, and any war as well, as we learned. This week, the Torah portion is Ki Tavo. So after the war and the conquering, they come in the land of Israel. Ki Tavo el haaretz, they come to the land that Hashem prepared for Bnei Israel. Listen to one of the first verses in this week's Torah portion, and I quote, chapter 26, verse 9, Vayvienu el hamakom hazeh, and God brought us to this place, Vayiten lanu et haaretz hazot, and He gave us this land. And what type of land is it? The Torah says, Eretz zavat halav udvash. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. The milk is obviously from the abundance of animals which produce milk. And the honey is not bees' honey, it's actually date honey. Because dates are one of the 7 species, fruits of Eretz Yisrael. And dates are sweet, very nutritious, and the land was flowing with sweet milk and honey, and it was a beautiful, beautiful blessing. The Zera Shimshon quotes Rashi, who quotes the Midrash, and tells us, Vayvienu lamakom hazeh, God brought us to this place. You know what this place is? This place is actually the place of the Bet HaMikdash. And then, Vayiten lanu et haaretz hazot, and God gave us this land. That's Eretz Yisrael. That's what Midrash says. So Hamakom is the Bet HaMikdash, where the Bet HaMikdash stood or will stand. And this land is the land of Israel. The Zera Shimshon asks a fundamental question, just in sequence of things. Where did Bnei Israel get to first? Did they come to the Bet HaMikdash first? Or the place of the Bet HaMikdash? Or did they enter the land of Israel in order to get to the Bet HaMikdash? Didn't they cross the border, get into Israel from east to west, go into Jerusalem, and then from Jerusalem to where the Bet HaMikdash will stand? So shouldn't the order have been opposite? It should have said, Vayiten lanu et haaretz hazot, and then Vayvienu lamakom hazeh. Why is the order swapped? The Zera Shimshon asks. He gives an answer that he saw elsewhere, and this answer is based on the commentary of the Targum Rabbeinu Yehonatan Ben Uziel. So, just so we understand, the Torah was given to us in Lashon HaKodesh in Hebrew. Moshe wrote it, inspired and divinely directed and instructed by God. And the Torah was translated into Aramaic, because Aramaic was the spoken language. And that's normally known to us as Targum Onkelos, the translation of Onkelos, a basic Chumash. If you open your basic Chumash, you have in big letters the Torah words, you have on the bottom Rashi, and you have on either one of the corners at the top, it says there Onkelos, or Targum Onkelos, which is the Aramaic translation of the verses. Generally speaking, between 90 to 95% of the time, Onkelos is just a word-for-word Aramaic translation of the Hebrew. There is sometimes he throws a little chidush, a little curveball, a little nuance. You got to be very, very exact when you're learning it to see if there's a difference there. But it's practically the same. There was another translation written on the Torah, and that was by Rabbeinu Yehonatan Ben Uziel. And his translation is a little different. It's also Aramaic, but he does add a little more, some midrashim, some chidushim, some twists, a little more alive. It's longer, but it's more alive. So look what he says on a verse that we find in Parashat Yitro. We are in Exodus chapter 19, verse 4. This is when God is telling the Jewish people, I'm taking you out of Egypt to bring you to Israel. Look what the Torah says. Atem ritem et asher asiti leMitzrayim. You saw what I did to Egypt, God tells the Jewish people. So come with me with faith and belief. And then God says, Va'esa etchem al kanfei nesharim. I'm going to have you on my wings, the same way as an eagle carries his or her young. I'm going to put you on my wings and bring you to Israel. Va'avi etchem elai, and bring you to me, God says. So Targum Rabbeinu Yonatan ben Uziel says, from here we learn, the Midrash teaches us, that first year when Bnei Israel slaughtered the Korban Pesach, and they put the blood on the doorpost, and they roasted the meat and they ate it. You know where they did that? They did it in Jerusalem. They did it by the place of the Bet HaMikdash. After they put the blood on the doorpost, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, take the animals, go all the way to Jerusalem. How'd they get there? They were literally teleported. By clouds, they were brought from Egypt directly to the place where the Bet HaMikdash was going to be. And over there they fulfilled the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, that very first year of the Exodus. Now, even though the next time they were there was only 40 years later, he says, based on that Hidush, it makes sense when the Pasuk says, Hashem, you brought us to this place, the place of the Bet HaMikdash, and then you gave us the land of Israel. Because before they were given the land of Israel, 40 years before they were given the land of Israel, they actually were brought to the place where they ate the Korban Pesach, the place of the Bet HaMikdash, and then 40 years later, they were given the land of Israel. That's the answer that Zera Shimshon quotes. But he gives his own answer. He gives an answer based on something the Zohar teaches us. The Zohar says that there are spiritual barriers which protect, like an iron dome, spiritual iron dome, which protect Eretz Israel from the surrounding countries. Now, this is in a very strong and spiritual sense. And this maintains the holiness, the peace, the success, prosperity in Eretz Israel. However, this power of these barriers for Eretz Israel only started once Bnei Israel actually built the Bet HaMikdash, and unfortunately, they disappeared with its destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. So although nowadays we do see that Eretz Israel is blessed, it's definitely prosperous, it's definitely different than any other country in the region and in the world, but that is nothing like the blessing and the protection it had when the Bet HaMikdash stood. And according to that, the Zera Shimshon says, do you know when Bnei Israel were really given the land of Israel? That's after the building of the Bet HaMikdash, after they got to Makom Hazeh, and after they got to the Bet HaMikdash, and they placed it, and they built it. After that, Vayitin lanu ta'aretz hazot, then finally they were able to enjoy, prosper, and be successful in the land of Israel the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu intended on it. Now for us, to remind us and to think of the Bet HaMikdash, well, just a little over a month ago, we just went through Tisha B'Av, the 3 weeks preceding it, the week of. But it's never enough for us to think about and to understand what we are missing by not having a Bet HaMikdash. The Bet HaMikdash was so great, there were miracles which took place on a daily basis. Not only did the Jewish people and the Jewish nation understand the great holiness and grandeur of God's presence here in this world, which is a connection between the spiritual world and the physical world, that was the Bet HaMikdash, the Goyim did too. The Goyim used to come. The Goyim used to bring sacrifices and send gifts and donations because they understood its magnitude and its power. But for us, it's very hard. It's very hard to imagine not having something when you never had it. And that's what we struggle with today, and even in many previous generations. We never had it. We never experienced it. We don't even know what we are really missing. And therefore, we still need to dig deep into our hearts, deep into the words of our Chazal, of our sages, to really try to depict in our minds what it was like, what we're really missing, and what we're longing for. So B'ezrat Hashem, with the zechut of the mitzvot that we are able to fulfill in Eretz Yisrael, And as well as out of Eretz Yisrael, will Bezat Hashem bring the Mashiach very quick, bring the third Bet HaMikdash, and reinstitute that spiritual iron dome, which is our greatest protection, more than any other type of protection that we have. HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself is the one who provides it. Amen.